Thanks for listening to Lighthouse Baptist Church podcast. Lighthouse Baptist Church is an independent, fundamental Baptist church located in Pleasanton, California. This message was preached live in one of our regular church services. If you find this message a help, please feel free to subscribe. You can find out more about us at our website, lbceastbay.com. Now to the message.
Very much. I appreciate that singing. Turn to Judges chapter 4 tonight. Judges chapter 4. And as Pastor mentioned, I have written a good bit. I don't like to promote it a whole lot, but if you want to endure some historical research, you can check out my website, increasinglearning.com, or you could just search for the name Bill Fortenberry. It's an unusual enough name that there's not very many of us out there. Although you'll find one that's a senator, and I promise I'm not him. So he's. If you just search for my name, it'll come up with some of my stuff. And I welcome criticism. So if you see an area where I could improve something I've written, please let me know, because I'm always interested in making it better. All right, Judges chapter 4 tonight. And a while back, I did a little bit of a study. I wanted to do, you hear in Sunday school, you hear all these different stories in the Bible. You hear David and Goliath, and you hear Joshua on the walls of Jericho. And in the Sunday school stories, they kind of make it like something for kids. So like Noah and the ark, and you see the picture, and you have the giraffes with their heads sticking out of the window, and it's a cute little tiny boat that you couldn't fit 5 animals on, but that's what they picture Noah's ark as. David and Goliath, you have David, this little scrawny, 8-year-old kid almost that's going out against this big giant with a sling, and I wanted to go back through those stories again and go back through all the fun stuff that I enjoyed as a kid about the Bible in those Sunday school lessons, and read them again as an adult and actually study them. And actually, I wasn't looking for spiritual insight. I was just looking to know what happened, to actually look at the battles, for example, and learn the military strategy that was used. It just fascinated me. What kind of strategy did God use? God didn't just reach down and work a miracle every time. Sometimes he gave them strategies, and he would tell them, here, you do this, and they'll respond this way, and then you can respond that way, and you'll win. And I just wanted to go back through a lot of those old stories that I'd heard all growing up and just study them again. And this is one of those stories that I studied that came out of that whole study of all the different battles in the Bible just for fun, but it still has a spiritual lesson. I mean, even when you're reading the Bible just for fun, just to learn something, you still come away with God talking to your heart and giving you guidance in life. And so I want to talk today about the Deborah and Barak in the book of Judges. In Judges chapter 4, I'm going to read the whole chapter to begin with, and then we're going to get into the message and look at how God always wins either with us or in spite of us. And so we can either be on his side and win, or he can win in spite of us, and we're just left in the dust. But let's look at Judges chapter 4, and we'll just read the whole chapter very quickly. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. And she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in Mount Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. And she sent and called Barak, the son of Abinoam, out of Kadesh Naphtali, and said unto him, Hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, Go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun. And I will draw unto thee to the river Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thine hand. And Barak said unto her, If thou wilt go with me, then I will go. But if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with thee. Notwithstanding, the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor. For the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kedesh. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kedesh, and he went up with 10,000 men at his feet, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite, which was of the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, had severed himself from the Kenites, and pitched his tent unto the plain of Zanaim, which is by Kedesh. And they showed Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam was gone up to Mount Tabor. And Sisera gathered together all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him, from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river Kishon. And Deborah said unto Barak, Up, for this is the day which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on his feet. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. Howbeit, Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said unto him, Turn in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. And he said unto her, Give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she opened a bottle of milk and gave him drink and covered him. And he said unto her, Stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be when any man doth come and inquire of thee and say, Is there any man here? That thou shalt say, No. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent and took an hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him, and smote the nail into his temples, and fastened it into the ground. For he was fast asleep and weary. So he died. I would imagine so. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him, and said unto him, Come, and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the nail was in his temples. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed against Jabin the king of Canaan until they had destroyed Jabin king of Canaan. So that's Judges chapter 4. Chapter 5, by the way, is a song that Deborah wrote about everything that took place in chapter 4. So there's more information in chapter 5, but we'll get to some of that in just a little bit. So let's go back now to verse number 1. And I just want to break this apart. The whole chapter, we're just going to break it apart and see what we can find inside of it. When you read it, we're not very familiar with the territory. We're not familiar with that area. We're not familiar with the history a lot of times. And so some of the things that are said in here just kind of, just very quickly just go right past us. And we miss some things. So let's slow it down. We're going to look at it. And I've got on your sheet the whole outline. I didn't put blanks today because I didn't want y'all having to figure out how to spell Zanaim and stuff like that. It's just right there for you. So we're going to start with the participants. And so we have the good guys and the bad guys. So the good guys, starting out, we have Deborah the prophetess, and we see her in verses 4 and 5. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. She dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel and Mount Ephraim. Now, the judge is the leader of Israel during this time. They're led by judges. This is a cycle. They go into captivity. A judge rises up, and a judge leads Israel and delivers them from the captivity. This is the only time that there is a woman judge. There's a whole bunch of judges throughout the whole book, and there's one female judge, and that's here with Deborah. And I think that Deborah is the judge here because the men were too scared. God prefers to have men in leadership. That's what he has written in the Bible. It's what he wants, is for the men to step up and to lead. But if they don't do it, he's going to find someone to lead. And so he raised up Deborah to be the leader here. Verse number 8 tells us about Barak. When Deborah came to Barak, who is the leader of the military leader of Israel, she came to him and said, go up and fight. And he says, well, if you'll go with me, if thou wilt go with me, then I will go. but if thou wilt not go with me, then I will not go. I mean, he's scared. He wants a woman to get in front of him and lead him into battle. And she's not even a soldier. She's a prophetess. But he doesn't want to go unless she goes with him. So the men have been scared. If we go to chapter 5 and verse 6 and 7, the people are so afraid that they've stopped even traveling back and forth through Israel. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, and the son of Jael, the highways were unoccupied, and the travelers walked through byways. The inhabitants of the village ceased. They ceased in Israel until that I, Deborah, arose, that I arose a mother in Israel. So the people are hiding in their homes. They're not even traveling. They're not out in the marketplace. They stay away from the highways, which in Israel is a very serious thing because they're commanded by God multiple times to all travel to Jerusalem for festivals. And so they're breaking the commands of God by not traveling anywhere, by hiding in their homes because they're so afraid. And that's when Deborah comes up and steps up and takes a leadership role, even though it's not what she was supposed to be doing, but that's what God called her to do because none of the men would do it. The next person we see is Barak the general. He's from the tribe of Naphtali. And you know, there's the 12 tribes of Israel. There's actually 11 tribes, and you have the 2 half-tribes coming from Joseph. And the tribe of Levi was exempted from the political part of Israel, so you end up with 12 all over again. So it basically comes down to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he's from the tribe of Naphtali. And he was commanded by God to gather an army and attack. If you look at verse number 6, Deborah doesn't tell him, go gather an army. She asks him, hasn't God told you to gather an army? So he'd already been told, and he wasn't doing it. And she had to come and ask him, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you getting this army that God has told you to gather up? And apparently he was just too afraid. There's a phrase in chapter 5, verse 12, where he is commanded to lead thy captivity captive. And so he's commanded the people that are your captors, you're to be the captors of them. Just turn the tables on them. And it's another phrase that's repeated in the New Testament where it talks about Jesus leading our captivity captive because he came and made us the victors instead of making us the victims. That's what Barak was supposed to do, and he didn't do it. And because of his fear, in verse number 9, God told him, because you're so afraid and you're having to be forced by a woman to do this, you're not going to get the honor. He could have had the honor of killing Sisera and defeating Sisera in a grand and glorious battle. God said, nope. You're too afraid, I'm not going to give it to you. Verse number 9, it says, I will surely go with thee, notwithstanding the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor. For the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. And so he had the opportunity, and he missed the opportunity because he was too scared to do what God asked him to do. The next person we see is Jael. Now, Jael is just a simple housewife. You know, she's not a warrior, she's not out in battle, she's not even an Israelite. She's a Kenite. So the Kenites were Moses' father-in-law's descendants, so they're from the area of Midian. And her husband Heber had decided to move up into Israel. So they're from the south, below Israel, and they've moved up north into the northern part of Israel by themselves. And she's the wife of Heber the Kenite. They lived apart from the rest of the Kenites. They lived near Kadesh Naphtali, and they were at peace with Israel's enemy. So she's not even on Israel's side, but she recognized, this is a bad guy, Sisera. I got to take him out. So that's Jael. A little bit about her, and then you have 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun. And so now I want you to go to chapter 5 and verse 14. Naphtali and Zebulun. That's just 2 of the 12 tribes. So there's 10,000 men, but all of Israel is under subjection here. All of Israel is in bondage, but only 10,000 men from 2 tribes were willing to go to battle. And it tells us a little bit in Deborah's song about the other people. So let's start with verse 14. Out of Ephraim was there a root of them against Amalek. And so for Ephraim, they apparently were called to battle, and they said, we're fighting Amalek. So it's a different nation, but it says just a root of them, just a few of them. just not the whole tree of Ephraim, just the root, just a tiny little bit of them. They were fighting Amalek, and they excused themselves from the entire battle. They excused the entire tribe from fighting against Jabin because they're busy fighting Amalek. And then you have Benjamin right after that, and I just lost my place, sorry. All right, Benjamin. After thee, Benjamin among thy people. So Benjamin is among the people of Ephraim. So they said, oh, we're helping Ephraim. We can't go help you. And then you have Machir, who is Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh. He's too involved in politics. Out of Machir came down governors. So they said, we're too busy governing. We're too busy with politics. We can't go to the battle. You have Zebulun, who said, well, we'll write about it. I'm an author. I like writing, but sometimes you're supposed to write, sometimes you're supposed to fight. And Zebulun said in verse 14 here at the end, out of Zebulun, they that handle the pen of the writer. So they said, we'll just write about it. Y'all go do the work, and we'll tell your story. And then you have Issachar, sent leaders, but no soldiers. And the princes of Issachar were with Deborah, even Issachar and also Barak. So they sent leaders, they didn't send any soldiers. So they weren't going to do the hard work. They were just going to be in leadership. Although leadership is actually kind of hard. But anyway, they didn't want to get their hands dirty. And then you have Reuben. Reuben said they're thinking about it. For the divisions of Reuben, there were great thoughts of heart. They thought about it. Yeah, we'll think about it. And they just kept thinking about it, kept thinking about it, kept thinking about it, and never actually got to the battle. Gilead, which is the tribe of Gad. Gilead abode beyond Jordan. So they said, we're too far away. Dan was busy with their shipping. Dan remained, and why did Dan remain in ships? In verse 17. And Asher didn't want to leave home. Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. So we're going to stay right where we are. We don't want to leave. Judah and Simeon, they aren't even mentioned in Deborah's song. They probably didn't even respond. When the summons was sent out, said, we need soldiers, they probably just didn't even bother responding. Only Naphtali and Zebulun were willing to fight. So only 2 out of all the tribes of Israel were willing to send men, and they managed to send 10,000 men to Barak. So that's the good guys. You have Deborah the prophetess, Barak the general, Jael the hero, and then you have the 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun. Now the bad guys, those are the Canaanites. And we see you have King Jabin of Hazor in verse number 2. He's mentioned multiple times, verse number 2, and then also at the very end he's mentioned several times. But Jabin, the king of Hazor. Now there's actually another Jabin, king of Hazor, mentioned in the Bible back in the book of Joshua, chapter 11. That's 120 years earlier. It's probably his grandfather or great-grandfather or something like that. Joshua completely wiped out the people of Hazor. And what happened when Joshua went through the land of Israel, he completely destroyed all of it. Killed man, woman, and child, killed all the animals. I mean, he just completely destroyed everything that breathed in the whole land. And then those people that were there had relatives in neighboring communities. And the Israelites sat on their haunches and they didn't go out and occupy the land after they defeated everyone. They just all stayed in one place and didn't spread out like they were supposed to. And so the relatives in the neighboring villages, they came back in and reoccupied those lands. And the book of Judges is largely about them having to go back and refight those same battles and take back land they had already conquered and they didn't occupy. And so this is one of those cases where Hazor is a land where they had already defeated it. That land was already theirs. They just didn't go in and occupy it and claim it. God had that blessing for them. They didn't claim it, and it turned into a curse later on when Jabin and one of the grandsons of Hazor came back. And then you have Sisera. Sisera is the general of the Canaanites. He lived in Harosheth, a city which is near the Kishon River. He had been terrorizing Israel for 20 years. And there's a very neat, interesting thing said about him at the end of chapter 5. He was apparently never married. And that was very unusual for that time period. But chapter 5, verse number 28, this is in Deborah's song again. And Deborah is talking about Sisera's mother. And she said, the mother of Sisera looked out a window and cried through the lattice, why his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the wheels of his chariots? Her wise ladies answered her. Yea, she returned answer to herself. Have they not sped? Have they not divided the prey to every man a damsel or two? To Sisera a prey of diverse colors, a prey of diverse colors of needlework, of diverse colors of needlework on both sides, meet for the necks of them that take the spoil. And so it's his mom that's mourning for him, not his wife, not his kids, just his mom. So apparently he was a mama's boy and liked fancy cloth and didn't actually end up taking a wife. I don't know if that meant that he was homosexual or what. That's a good possibility because that was one of the sins that they were driving the Canaanites out for. But he had never married and just had his mom, and he was a mama's boy. And a bit of a sissy, we're going to find out in just a minute. And then you had the 900 chariots of iron. And you can see on the screen up there a little bit of an image of a chariot from kind of what a chariot would look like back then. So this chariots have iron sides, they have horses in front of them pulling them. These were the tanks of those days. And the way chariots were used in battle back then is they didn't really fight from the chariots. They used the chariots to just mow down the enemy. And so the enemy is coming up as foot soldiers, and then they just get these big, heavy chariots pulled by multiple teams of horses, and they just run them right over and kill them by running them over. The horse hooves stomp them into the ground, and the chariot wheels run over them, and the people in the chariot are protected by the iron that's around them, so they can't be shot down with arrows, or if someone happens to dodge the horses and tries to get the charioteer with a sword or a spear, they have to get through the iron sides of the chariot, and they can't do that. And so the chariot just keeps going and then turns around and comes back and do it again. And they would just go back and forth mowing people down in these chariots. And that was the way that Sisera fought his battles. So very little danger to him and lots of danger to the people that were opposing him. All right, so that's the participants. You have the good guys that were Israel, the 10,000 men, Deborah and Barak, the bad guys. You have Sisera and his 900 chariots of iron. They're serving Jabin, the king of Hazor. All right, let's look at the location. If you'll go ahead and pull up that map on the screen, and it's kind of hard to see on that screen back there. I don't know if it's easier for y'all to see up here. You have the same map in your handout there. Yours isn't all colored in. It's just a sketch. But there's some important places on this map. You have Kadesh Naphtali. Excuse me. It's a city on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So I think it's on the southern shore. Some people say it's on the northern shore. They're not entirely certain of exactly which shore it's on, but it's on one of the shores of the Sea of Galilee. I put it on the southern shore because of my research. I think that's accurate. Then you have Zanaim, and I don't have Zanaim listed on either map, but it is just to the left of Kedesh. And so if you can see on this map up here, there's kind of a flat area next to Kedesh. And that's Zanaim. That's the plain of Zanaim. So that's where Heber, the Kenite, that's where Jael, their tent was right there in that plain. So right there next to Kedesh. Then you have Mount Tabor. That's the one that's in the middle. And on this screen, you can see it's a little bit of an elevation up to Mount Tabor. It's the high point in the area. Very strategic for God to tell Barak to take his men up to Mount Tabor because that gives them the high ground. Then you have Harosheth. That is a town that is occupied by Gentiles. So this is going to be Jabin's people that are in Harosheth. And that is all the way over next to the river. The river there is the river Kishon. And so you have those points, and the battle is going to be fought in between those points. The battle most likely started at the base of Mount Tabor because Barak waited until the very last minute to go down. In verse number 14 of chapter 4, Deborah has to come to Barak and said, "Up, for this is the day which the Lord has delivered Sisera into thine hand." He wasn't going to battle. He's there, he's got his soldiers, he's ready for battle, and he's still just sitting there. And Deborah has to come in and say, get up, go to battle, get out there and fight. So he's waiting till the very end. So the battle's probably all the fighting probably took place right at the base of the mountain of Mount Tabor. All right, so that's the location. Now let's look at the battle itself. And in verse number 6, we see, the background information. Deborah calls Barak to go to Mount Ephraim. He goes to Mount Ephraim. Then they go back to Kedesh. And I don't have Ephraim put on there. It's a little bit south of Mount Tabor on the southern side of the plain. They go back to Kedesh together in verse number 9. And so in verse number 9, she said, "I will surely go with thee." At the end, and Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kedesh. And then in verses 10, 6, and 12, so we're going to start with 10. Verse number 10, it says, "And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kedesh, and he went up with 10,000 men at his feet." And then verse number 6 says basically the same thing. Earlier, Deborah had told Barak, "Hath not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, Go and draw toward Mount Tabor and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali. And then also in verse number 12, and they showed Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam was gone up to Mount Tabor. So Barak went up to Mount Tabor. It's the high point in the area. It's a very strategic idea to go up there to start your battle. One of the reasons for him to go up to Mount Tabor instead of coming out in the plain is because chariots aren't very good on the mountains. Chariots are really good out in the plain because they can all just line up in a row and just charge over the enemy. But when they get into the mountains, the chariots, there are many places that the paths aren't wide enough for chariots, so they can't go up. Where there's not a path, they can't go at all. So they lose their advantage when the chariots start going up the mountain. So that's why Barak went to the mountain instead of out into the plain to fight these chariots. Heber had seen Barak go up to the mountain. Remember, Heber is friends with Jabin. They're at peace with Jabin. And so Heber saw Barak go up to the mountain. And so in verse 11 and 12, Heber then sent word to Sisera that Barak was up on the mountain. Sisera then gathered all of his army at Kishon near Harosheth of the Gentiles. So you can see, if you look on your map, you've got Mount Tabor way over here. You've got Kishon and Harosheth of the Gentiles over here. There's a big open plain in between them. And so you have the mountains where Barak is. You have the plain and the river where Sisera is. And Sisera is marching across the plain to Mount Tabor. And so Deborah had to tell Barak, get up, go fight. So Barak gets up and he goes fights. The Israelites come rushing down the mountain. The chariots are coming toward the mountain. The Israelites meet the chariots, and something very interesting happens. Verse number 15 says, and the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak. That should not have happened. That is physically impossible. For these are ragtag men. They're not soldiers. They're just farmers. They got some swords, and they're going up against tanks, and they win. And that really should not happen. There's no explanation here about it. But if you go to chapter 5 and verse 20, we have another statement that we don't really understand. But in chapter 5, verse 20, Deborah is saying, they fought from heaven. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera. And we don't really know what that means. But something happened so that the stars in heaven are fighting against Sisera. It could have been like with Joshua with his longest day. During that battle, you had hailstones coming out. And the hailstones, they're massive hailstones. They're coming out and hitting the enemy and killing the enemy as the Israelites fought. Could have been something like that. Could have been lightning from the heavens that was striking these iron chariots. I mean, you can imagine an iron chariot and lightning striking it. Everyone in that chariot's going to die. The horses are probably going to die. That'd be pretty severe. It may even jump from chariot to chariot. Could have been something like, we don't know exactly what it was, but we know God is the one that won that battle. It wasn't Barak. It wasn't the children of Israel. God himself worked a miracle and won that battle for them. And so once that happened, once God stepped in and discomfited Sisera, did whatever he did to cause them to start losing, Sisera showed what a sissy he was, and he turned around and ran. They had every advantage, but they couldn't fight against God. So they just turned around and ran. And in their chariots, driving their chariots away. Now, you can imagine a chariot drawn by multiple teams of horses, they're going to be pretty fast. But look at verse number 16 in chapter 4. If I can get back there. All right, chapter 4, verse number 16. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. God gave the Israelites the strength to run down the chariots. And they're running down the chariots, and most likely the chariots didn't have protection in the rear because that's where people get on and off that are fighting on the chariots. And so the Israelites are able to run up from the rear and attack these chariots and kill the men that are inside of the chariots. And that should not have happened either. So God gave them superhuman speed so that they could run and catch up to the chariots and just be killing the people the whole time that they're driving their chariots as fast as they can in the opposite direction. Look at chapter 5 and verse 21 now. I know I'm having y'all flip back and forth. Maybe have it open on both sides of your Bible with yours. All right, so chapter 5, verse number 21. The river of Kishon swept them away. that ancient river, the river Kishon. Okay, so you see where Mount Tabor is. You see where Kishon is. They pursued them all the way across that plain. It's wide open fields. The chariots had every advantage. They could have at any time turned around and supposedly won. They should also have been able to get away because it's wide open plains. And yet they pursued them all the way. And they were killing them all the way to the river Kishon and stayed up with them. And then look at verse number 22. Then were the horse hooves broken by the means of the prancings of their mighty ones. And I don't know if any of y'all know a whole lot about horses, but there's a condition where a horse's hoof will crack and split, and it makes the horse go lame so that they can't keep going. And this is what this is talking about. Their hooves cracked and split and made the horses go lame. And it says it wasn't by a miracle of God. This is by means of their prancings. So that means the horse prancing is slamming his foot down. And so the horses were being driven so hard by the charioteers that they were hitting the ground so hard with their feet that it split the horse hooves and caused the horses to go lame. And so, that could have been what God used to allow the Israelites to catch up to them, that they're just driving them so hard out of so much fear that the hooves are splitting and the horses are going lame and the chariots are foundering and they're able to catch up to them. So all of that fascinates me, that God would come in and God fights from heaven, God wins the victory, the Israelites are chasing these chariots, never should have happened, and they're winning this great victory. But what fascinates me even more is what Sisera did. Go back to chapter 4, verse 17. And this is where the map really comes in handy to help us understand this story. Verse number 17 says, "Howbeit Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite." Do you remember where Heber's tent is located? It's located in the plain of Zanaim. That's all the way over against Kedesh on your map. All right, so remember where the chariots are going? The chariots are going to the Kishon River because that's their home base. So they're fleeing back to the Kishon River. Sisera, instead of going with his men to the Kishon River, he jumped out of a chariot and he ran the opposite direction. So all of his men are going this way. He says, that's where the Israelites are going. They're chasing my men. I'm getting out of here. And he took off in the opposite direction and ran and hid in a tent and told the lady, Jael, just don't let anyone know I'm here. And so he's hiding in a tent trying to stay away from Barak. This is the guy that terrorized Israel for 20 years. This is the guy everyone was so afraid of that they were hiding in their houses. They weren't going to the marketplaces. They weren't obeying God and going out to the festivals like they were supposed to. And the first sign of trouble, and he goes and hides himself in a tent trying to get away from the Israelites. There was no need for them to be afraid the entire time. God could have done this the very first moment that Sisera showed his head. God could have given them the victory right away. They just didn't claim it. And so it becomes real convicting to me. But then we see Jael. Everyone likes the story of Jael, that she drove the nail through Sisera's head. The nail that it's talking about is probably a tent spike. It's probably 18 inches to 2 feet long. It's a big nail. And she came up and drove it through his head. There is an interesting statement in chapter 5, verse 26, that she didn't just drive the nail through his head. In chapter 5, verse 26, she put her hand to the nail and her right hand to the workman's hammer, and with the hammer she smote Sisera. She smote off his head when she had pierced and stricken through his temples. So she didn't just drive the nail through his head and kill him. She then decided, I'm going to make sure, and she cut his head off too. And so when Barak made it there, the head's already severed from the body, and she made absolutely certain that this guy was dead. So that's the battle. That's what happened with Sisera. And the conclusion that I got from this as I was studying, and as I said, it was very convicting to me, that God, the whole time, God was able to use anyone to deliver Israel. He could have used Barak right at the beginning. We don't know when God told Barak to gather this army. It may have been right away that God told Barak to gather the army. But he delayed and he delayed and he delayed because he's afraid. The whole time he's afraid. God had commanded a man to lead them. The man was too afraid, so God had to use a woman instead. And what convicted me is that God will always accomplish his will. He's always going to accomplish what he wants to have done. Doesn't matter who he uses, he's going to get the job done that he wants done. And so the question is, do we come alongside him and let him use us so that we can get the glory and the victory? Not that we do it for glory, but if we don't, then we just get left in the dust and God uses someone else, and someone else gets that great feeling of being used of God. And so as we look at the challenges that are facing us, the challenges of this church, wanting to grow, wanting to win more souls, it's not a matter of whether God's going to win more souls in this area. It's a question of, is God going to use this church to win more souls in the area? And if the church steps up and starts doing what God asks us to do, then yes, he will use this church to do it. If we sit back and say, no, we're too afraid, people are mean, they're going to slam the door in my face, then God will use someone else, and that other church will get the glory. And so it's convicting in my own life as I've been going through things, seeing, God opens doors, and do I want to go through that door? Maybe it's a little scary, might mean a move, might mean having to give up some stuff, might have some financial difficulties, maybe I won't do that. But God's going to get someone to go through that open door and go step into whatever ministry he wants. And if it's not me, it's just going to be someone else, and I'm going to miss out. And so I want all of us to think about that as we go home tonight, throughout the week. Just be thinking, when God has things for us to do, it may look a little scary, but God's going to step in. God's going to get the victory, just like he got the victory over Sisera. It's just a question of whether we get the blessing or someone else gets that blessing. So that's the thought I'll leave you with tonight from Judges chapter 4. Pastor.
Thanks again for listening to Lighthouse Baptist Church Podcast. Find out more about us at our website, lbceastbay.com. I hope you can visit again real soon.